Well, one of the things that we can clearly see is in high income countries, 57% of people eat their vegetables every day, 40% do their physical activity, 5% engage in arts. And I really don't believe that arts are any less enjoyable than those other health behaviors. I think it's more that we're very much used to the idea that physical activity and diet, that healthy diets have got these inherent health benefits, but we're not used to talking about the arts in that same way.
So tell me, why do we still tend to see creative pursuits as playful or indulgent rather than serious and essential?
It's a good question. I think part of it is that as societies, we've got used to thinking about the arts and culture as leisure activities, as hobbies, the kind of thing that you should only do when you've got enough time or enough money to do them. But it's something that really doesn't actually make much logical sense because when you look back across history, the arts were absolutely fundamental to our day to day lives. It's our modern societies that have inverted that prioritization.
How so? I mean, where did the idea come from that the arts sit outside real work or health or productivity?
It was particularly a thing in the 1800s where the kind of rise of the leisure classes meant that people started considering what they would do with free time. And we saw much more professionalization of the arts, the development of arts organizations, and the idea that you would start paying more to go to arts and cultural events. And that's where this idea about art for art's sake also came in, which started to make it feel like if we talked about the arts having any kind of value and purpose in our lives, it was somehow degrading the arts experience. But that's very much not the way I think we should be thinking about it.
And I mean, do you think that even people who love the arts underestimate their real impact, how necessary they are?
Completely. And the thing is, it's a good thing. We should all engage in the arts for the joy of doing it. I'm certainly not proposing that we should be making it all about our health. But I think it's important to acknowledge that when we are going to events or gigs or performances or galleries, or when we're enjoying doing crafts in our own home, that is having an impact on us, whether or not we're talking about it. So I think it's important to recognize and articulate what that impact is.
Absolutely. So let's delve into the science of it. When did you first realise that art wasn't just enriching life, but it could actually change health outcomes?
For me, it was when I was working in the NHS just after leaving university, and I was working in hospitals that had arts programs. And I actually saw firsthand the impact that arts were having. I saw a young child with burns, I remember, who was in A&E and suddenly didn't need any morphine for the pain once he was distracted by a theatre performance that was going on. And I saw people with dementia who wouldn't be able to recognise the relatives who were visiting, but who would be singing along to the pianist who was playing on the ward. So seeing those tangible examples of that benefit, I was just fascinated to know why and how was this happening.
So what is actually happening neurologically when visual art or music or dance acts like a drug in the body?
Well, I think calling it a drug is actually a really good way of thinking about it because we actually see it's the same kind of physiological response to the arts that we get to drugs. So when we're engaging in something, an arts activity that makes us feel happy, it's because we're actually activating the dopaminergic reward system in the brain, which is the same reward system activated by drugs, sex, and food to make us feel happy. When we actually feel that reduction in pain, like that young child felt, that's because arts engagement, things like music, for example, activates endogenous opioids in our brains, so naturally occurring opioids that help to reduce pain response. When we say that we're feeling less anxious when we might be looking at artwork or listening to music or reading a book, it's because there's physiological responses in our bodies, like a down regulation of our stress hormones and our heart rate and blood pressure, which is exactly what we see from anti-anxiety medication like benzodiazepines.
And how strong is the evidence linking arts engagement to longer life?
This is a really intriguing one because when we talk about the linking arts with longevity, often this comes from observational cohort studies. So it's data that will track thousands of people across their entire life course. And this is how we've linked other things to a longer lifespan, things like exercise, for example, or not smoking as well. It's exposures where you can't ethically randomize someone not to get it. So we've seen that with the arts as well. People who engage in the arts have a longer lifespan. But crucially, this is even when we've taken into account their demographics, their wealth, their other health and lifestyle behaviors. But there's also really exciting evidence that's helping to make us think this is a causal link rather than just a correlation. And this is actually new evidence that shows when people engage in the arts, they actually have slower physiological, biological aging in their bodies. So people who are regularly arts engaged, their patterns of brain connectivity actually show a slower pace of brain aging. They also have different patterns of gene expression in their DNA called epigenetic clocks, which indicate they are biologically younger. And they also have clinical biomarkers like levels of inflammation, respiratory function, musculoskeletal function, which also indicates a decelerated physiological age.
Which is extraordinary. So beyond this, beyond protecting against physical decline, how does attending live culture like concerts or museums or theatre protect against loneliness?
Well, when we go to these events, often we go with people, so it's a kind of vehicle to us socializing, but it can be more than that. Even if we just go on our own, if we are in a group surrounded by other people, even if they're strangers, it is bringing us into that social situation, which is something that we as a species crave. But actually, intriguingly, even watching plays, for example, so watching other people on stage can actually help us to feel less lonely because when we are watching those characters, our brains are putting ourselves in their feet, like the emotions that we're feeling, we're imagining that we're part of that story with them. And that actually is a real neurological response. We can even have that feeling that a character was like our new best friend by the time we've watched a play. And that's called a parasocial interaction, this belief that you've almost formed a relationship with a fictional character.
Mm.
And that achieves something called social snacking. It helps us to feel like we've had those moments of social interaction that help us to feel a little bit more socially connected, a little bit like you have sometimes when you're walking down the street. Just saying hello to a stranger and smiling at them can actually help you to feel that connectivity. And that's the kind of thing we're getting, that social snacking, from going to arts events as well.
I wonder if reading also figures in this, in the way that immersing yourself in fiction can be a sort of empathy generator. Would books have the same effect?
Very much so. And actually, the empathy that we feel for characters in books isn't fake. It's real. It actually is the same regions of the brain involved in real life empathy. And something that books are really good at as well is helping us to put ourselves in other people's shoes and imagine things from their perspective, which is called theory of mind. And that's a cognitive skill which is absolutely fundamental in life to being able to navigate our interactions with others, even navigate sort of complex situations in the real world. So practicing that through literature hones what is called the predictive coding in our brains, that the ability of our brains to then be able to plan and respond to real life complexity in a good, emotionally thoughtful way.
And I mean, does this just go for traditional arts? Or if, for instance, you're using kind of 3D technology to put yourself into another situation, would that also stimulate the same responses?
Well, 3D technology, sort of virtual experiences, that still has benefits. It's still bringing us a lot of the same, I guess, ingredients or components. But I think we have to be slightly more cautious about it. It depends what kind of health outcomes we're thinking about associating with it. Interestingly, people who do virtual choirs, where you sing through a video link rather than in person, they do get quite a similar emotional response, but they don't get the same social response, that feeling of social connectivity. So it could be helpful if you're living somewhere very isolated and there's not a real life option, but it's not exactly a direct alternative. And
Mm.
similarly, we know that live cultural events like going to museums, going to plays, going to gigs, those have cognitive benefits as we get older. But actually, we don't see that from going to the cinema. And the current hypotheses are that cinema, because it is that screen based activity, it is putting your brain into a more alert but also more passive state. So again, from a cognitive perspective, there isn't a substitute for that real life engagement.
And how early does creativity begin shaping us biologically and psychologically?
Right from when we're in the womb. We actually know that babies respond to music only just a few months into being in the womb. And actually, music is thought of evolutionarily to have partly developed as a way of helping to support the development of speech in young infants. So that slightly annoying sing-song voice that everyone does with babies, which is called motherese, that's actually a really beneficial thing to do because those melodic arches are easier for babies to understand than long strings of words. And actually, in babies, music and speech are processed in a much more overlapped way than they are in adults. So when babies listen to music, it's actually helping to train and build the neural architecture in the regions of the brain that are going to be critical to speech.
Extraordinary. Why are creative activities particularly powerful for people recovering from injury or from illness?
Partly because of the cognitive benefits, like the ones we were just talking about, because actually the arts, things like music, for example, it involves so many different regions of the brain that if somebody has some kind of brain injury from a stroke, for example, then actually it's a very good brain workout. It can actually help to build new neural pathways around brain injury just from something like listening to music. And if people have had speech affected by a stroke, then listening to vocal music is actually one of the activities that's been shown in randomized trials to actually help to build the redevelopment, the reacquisition of speech. But also, we can use the arts as a way of supporting other outcomes for people who've had brain injuries. So, for people who've got neurological disorders that have affected movements, then the fact that things like music have got that rhythm to them, then that rhythm, that beat, is something that our brains naturally synchronize to. So that feeling when you're listening to a song and you can't help but tap along, that's because music is processed directly in rhythm areas, and this means that we can use music and the beats to help give us a rhythm to match our movements to. So if people who've had a stroke just listen to music on headphones whilst they're walking, then if that music has the beat of a normal walking pace, like 60 to 80 beats a minute, they'll actually synchronize their walking with it, and it can help their walking to be smoother, better balanced, and actually faster as well.
What about people who are already suffering from some kind of cognitive decline or some sort of degenerative neurological disorder? Can they be helped in this way?
They can. For people with Parkinson's disease, actually, dance classes have been shown to help to slow the rate of motor decline. And of course, people are often recommended to do exercise classes. But the dance brings that added creative element, which can make it more appealing and help the motivation of engaging. But I've also spoken to patients who've said that it also means that instead of feeling like you're just trying to relearn a skill you already had, like walking, it's actually giving you something new. It's more positive. It's thinking about a new creative skill of dance that you're doing. And of course, it can bring more mental health benefits as well through things like the music and the beauty of the movement that you're creating. And for people who have dementias, we can also think about what's really important for maintaining quality of life. Actually, the region in the brain that is involved in processing long-term musical memory is one of the last ones to be affected in dementia, meaning that people will often remember songs even if they've forgotten their relatives. So it can be a really lovely way of still being able to connect with someone who has dementia, and actually being able to play music or look at photographs or engage in crafts activities is also a good way of reducing anxiety, reducing depression, and improving quality of life for people with dementia too.
So if the arts were treated like diet or exercise, how might our daily routines look different?
Well, one of the things that we can clearly see is in high income countries, 57% of people eat their vegetables every day, 40% do their physical activity, 5% engage in arts. And I really don't believe that arts are any less enjoyable than those other health behaviors. I think it's more that we're very much used to the idea that physical activity and diet, that healthy diets have got these inherent health benefits, but we're not used to talking about the arts in that same way. So I think in the same way we've come up with rules to help us maintain our engagement, like eat your 5 vegetables a day or do your 30 minutes of exercise, I think it can be really nice to think about what our personal equivalent of that is for the arts, like whether we can find 15 or 20 minutes of creative time in a day that we want to have, or whether we can just do some simple swaps, like, for example, not looking at the news on our phones on the way to work, but reading a book. And when we're meeting up with friends, not just meeting for a drink or dinner, but meeting up and maybe going to a cultural event or performance or space or something like that.
And so what then would an arts prescription look like if we were to swap that out perhaps for drug prescriptions?
Well, we already have this happening in the NHS. So anybody can go to their GP at the moment and be given a social prescription, so a prescription to any kind of community activity, including arts activities. And this is because there's a recognition that there is this evidence base about how beneficial these activities can be for mental and physical health. And there are many examples actually now where we're seeing that you get the same sized benefits from doing arts as for medical treatments as one option for people with mild and moderate depression, actually the benefits of going to arts classes, it's the same sized improvement that people see as from psychological therapies or medication. So I think it's important people are aware of that. So they're aware that there are a range of options that could be supporting them, but also they know that health professionals already can help to have those conversations and help them to navigate towards appropriate activities local to them.
And do you think that there's a minimum of engagement needed to see benefits, or does almost any creative activity help?
I think it depends what you're trying to help. So if you're feeling really stressed in the moment, then just doing a few minutes of craft activities or listening to relaxing music could be enough to reduce that stress there and then. But that's not going to be having benefits years later unless you actually maintain that engagement. So when we're talking about some of those longer term outcomes, like reducing the risk of developing depression or maintaining strong cognitive function, or thinking about some of those associations with biological aging or longevity, that what's really important there is about regular, sustained engagement, just like we see for other health behaviors.
Mm. So what are the consequences then of undervaluing creative careers at a societal level?
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing over the last decade, there have been major cuts to arts funding in the UK, US, many other countries. We've seen enormous closures of arts venues, of libraries. We've seen a lot of challenges for professional artists in terms of the precarity in their own careers. And I think this is a real problem because if we lose all of that foundation, then there aren't going to be opportunities for us to engage in the arts within society. But I do think that there are some really promising discussions going on already. We've heard in recent months about revitalization of the arts within school curricula being proposed as an idea in response to curriculum reviews. We've seen Scotland and Wales have just promised real-time arts funding increases over the next year, which is another really exciting development. And we're most of all seeing a huge grassroots movement of arts organisations that are really passionately delivering projects in local communities to try and support health and well-being.
So do you think that we really are moving towards a position where creativity is taken as seriously as prevention and it's not just decoration? Are the authorities, so to speak, on board with that?
Well, I've been working with the World Health Organization now for the last 8 years, and they are very much on board with the importance of this. In fact, we actually have a roadmap in place at the moment involving new technical reports, briefings, and a technical resolution acknowledging the arts as a health behavior. So we're seeing that very high level engagement and I guess endorsement of this topic as well. But alongside that, we're also seeing so many individual countries now that are integrating the arts alongside health within their national policies. My team counted over 200 national policy documents on this from around the world that have been published in the last 10 years. So I think there is but both this activation from the grassroots and also the activation top down from policy, which is starting to make this feel like that there's a real change in energy around recognition of the value of the arts.
Mm. And if there's one misconception that you most want to dismantle with this book, Art Cure, what is it?
I think it's really about the way that we are just fundamentally thinking wrongly about the arts. We're deprioritizing it, we're devaluing it, we're seeing it as a luxury when actually the arts are an absolute necessity in our lives. I really believe that they are a missing pillar when it comes to our health.
So ultimately, is art helping us to survive, or is it teaching us how to flourish?
I'd argue it's doing both. I think something I always find very moving is whenever we see examples of true global catastrophe, it's surprising how the arts are actually often very prominent, even in those moments. We've seen that, for example, in COVID, where we have people singing from balconies, painting rainbows, streaming plays online, reading endless books. It was a way for us to cope psychologically with the huge trauma of what was happening. There have been some incredibly moving images coming out of refugee camps over the last year of people singing, dancing, using culture as this expression and communal value and a way of building cohesion within those terrible settings. And I think that's another example of that. And so I think it's important for us to realize that actually whenever we get hit with the most difficult times, the arts is something we turn to. That really reinforces the point that they're not that luxury, but they're actually a human essential.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Wow, you're so articulate. What a great speaker.
Thank you.